Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast by Third Wave, where we explore how the safe and responsible use of psychedelics can catalyze individual and collective transformation. This is your host, Paul F. Austin, and today I am speaking with Stephanie Wang, founder and CEO of Empathogenics.
Kanna is great for integration after any psychedelic journey. From a shamanic standpoint, it is heart medicine, so it brings you into consciousness through the heart, and it holds that space for you to process all that stuff in a very loving way and gentle way. And that's honestly, that sort of virtual hug or plant hug is kind of what we need, especially in this day and age when we are always, walloped, whether by stressful events or even when we're doing psychedelic ceremony.
In this episode of the Psychedelic Podcast, I talk with Stephanie Wang, founder and CEO of Empathogenics, as she shares her journey from finance to plant medicine, including her involvement at the Alchemist kitchen, which we'll dive deeper into. We discuss the unique benefits of Kanna, its comparisons to SSRIs, and the branding behind Ka and how intentional it is. And Stephanie also highlights the importance of education and community in the Kanna space. She closes by sharing her vision for Ka, touching on exciting new research into Kanna. So who is Stephanie Wang? Stephanie Wang is passionate about the power of plants and evolving consciousness. She is the founder and CEO of Empathogenics, with a mission to restore full spectrum aliveness for all beings. Ka offers 100% plant-based empathogenic supplements featuring Kanna, a heart-opening succulent from South Africa that is clinically proven to activate an immediate sense of grounded energy, helping people to feel more alive, capable, and connected as they navigate everyday stress. Previously, Stephanie was the president of the Alchemist Kitchen and director of Evolver, a conscious lifestyle company in New York. She was also a documentary and narrative film producer. A native Hong Konger, Stephanie began her career in corporate finance on Wall Street and was a number one ranked equity analyst in the retail sector with HSBC Securities Hong Kong. So what do we get into today? Stephanie's journey from a career in finance to evolving consciousness, including her role in the evolution of the Evolver network and the Alchemist kitchen. We talk about her first Kanna experience, her exploration of Kanna as an ally for well-being, psychedelic integration, and more. We also discuss this relationship between SSRIs and Kanna, how Kanna might be an alternative to SSRIs, and then we go deep into Ka's branding, design, and educational efforts. Finally, we talk about the unique sensation of Ka's ingredients and Stephanie's vision for Ka and the outlook of future Kanna research. So Ka is offering listeners of the Psychedelic Podcast 10% off. Just go to ohmyka.com and use the code ThirdWave at checkout. And they also have a Kanna microdosing journey coming up that you can also check out at ohmyka.com. All right, that's it for now. I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Stephanie Wang. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's really a pleasure to connect with you in this way, and I'm excited to dive into your story, to the story of Kanna, to the story of Ka. A lot of ground to dig into today for discussion. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for having me on this podcast. It's good to see you.
So it's great to see you. Yeah. We had a chance to briefly meet at Wonderland in November 2023, which was a conference that was located in Miami. The focus this past year was on longevity, I believe, and you had a stand there with Ka products, Empathogenics products, and brochures and educational. And I'd also at the MAPS conference had an opportunity to try a few of your products, both the chew and the tincture. And there were some interesting aspects around it that I want to dive in deeper with, or dive in deeper to with you. So where I'd love to start is New York City. As I was diving a little bit into your background and history, I noticed that you had helped to create some really interesting companies and brands in New York. The Evolver group and then also the Alchemist Kitchen in particular. So I'd love just to hear a little bit about your relationship to New York City, what brought you there, and then how you ended up weaving your way into this early consciousness space in the 2010s.
Sure. My background, even before that, was actually in finance. So I got to a point where I was so burnt out. I'm from Hong Kong, and so I was working in finance both on Wall Street and in Hong Kong. And but I got super burnt out, and I really wanted to do something different. And what first brought me to New York was actually film. So I studied film at the New York Film Academy, just did a quick course, and had my short film in some festivals. And, it was just the idea of storytelling with images, storytelling with sound, whether it's in a narrative fiction context or a documentary context. So that's what first got me into New York. I mean, second time that got me into New York, post finance. And, I really, really loved it. But it really still was not fully satisfying what my true passion it was and still is, which is evolving consciousness and personal transformation. And that has always been what has driven me. And, I think things changed a lot when I had my very first sacred plant ceremony. And that was in 2013. And interestingly, it was actually with Kanna. It was not with ayahuasca or psilocybin or anything like that. And just made, of course, an indelible impression on me. And really was sort of the beginnings of what inspired me to create Ka as a company. But before then, I was working with Kanna for personal healing. And it was through sort of this circle of people is how I met Daniel Pinchbeck and Ken Jordan, and who sadly recently passed away. And that's how I ended up it was very kismet. Somehow I ended up joining the company at that point, and also started working with Lou Sagar, the CEO at the time. And together, the next year of that is when we birthed the Alchemist Kitchen. So, you could say that it was the plants themselves, the psychedelic and psychoactive plants, that actually led me to where I ended up in New York, which is in the Alchemist Kitchen. So I think it's not a stretch to say that at all.
Well, it's interesting. This is now the second time in the span of maybe 6 or 7 months that the Evolver Network has come up in a way. I was speaking at an event in San Diego at this intentional community called Evo, and there was a couple who lived there on that land in San Diego who had been very involved with the Evolver Network, and their names escape me now, but it brought me back to Pinchbeck and Ken. And I, living in New York for a couple of years, I had gotten to know Pinchbeck, and then Ken and I had coffee a couple of times, and I would go into the Alchemist Kitchen. I actually hosted an event at the Alchemist Kitchen, I believe in 2017, downstairs there about microdosing, and was really just at the beginning stages of moving to New York. I think it was within the first week or two that I moved to New York that I hosted this event. It was August 2017, and was really impressed by how developed this all seemed. And so I'd love to go a little bit deeper. Just if you could tell our audience a little bit about what was the Evolver Network, and then what role did the Alchemist Kitchen play? And more broadly, what was it like to be in psychedelics and consciousness in 2013, 2014, 2015 in New York? Was it still quite niche? Was it becoming more prominent due to Burning Man? What was sort of the vibe there with psychedelics in New York at that point in time?
Sure. For people who don't know what Evolver was and is, Evolver's gone through many iterations. And in the very, very beginning, I want to say that was 20 plus years ago is when Daniel Pinchbeck and Ken first started it. And, the first iteration or the first content piece that came from that, I believe, was Reality Sandwich, which was sort of one of the very first, I believe, digital magazines that focused entirely on psychedelics and psychedelics psychedelic culture, but also surrounding psychedelic culture, things like psychogeometry, plant medicines, all kinds of herbal, not so much herbalism, but plant medicines, maybe transcendental meditation, topics that were not yet mainstream, certainly at that time, but had been incubating enough in the 60s and 70s and 80s that there was definitely an audience there, right? But it hadn't yet seen a modern expression of what that would look like. And Ken, I think, especially was instrumental in creating Evolver Learning Lab, for example, would be not just writing articles about all of these topics that I just mentioned, but to create workshops for people to learn how to do this, to make, to maybe grow their own, grow their own mushrooms, or to learn about sacred geometry and how to apply it to their life, like all of these kinds of topics, right? And there were also, oh my God, this is like so long ago, but there was also the mycelium network, which was super cool. And there were little sort of Evolver mycelium pods all over the country. And I think maybe possibly even abroad. And these were like sort of local groups that would get together because it was to create a safe space, essentially, to talk about all these things and discuss all of these things without feeling like they were being judged. And, also just creating community and support for each other. And so that was really beautiful. And then as it progressed, I think Evolve, and this is still before I joined. And, as the network progressed, I mean, there still is like a massive Facebook following. I think it's still above 3 million or something like that. And so there was this great network, but there had not yet been a super successful way of how to monetize or how to like keep this going and make it sustainable. And I think shortly before I joined, Evolver had hired, Lou had joined the company as a CEO, and he was like, okay, what are people looking for, and how can we connect sort of commerce and sustainable commerce with community and learning, right? And so, that's when he started sort of, this is before the Alchemist Kitchen, but he started sort of an Evolver shop where, you could buy crystals, or you could buy, they could get a tarot deck, or they could get something that would be sort of in that cultural interest. And from that point on, what we realized is like, wait a minute, if we did not have, yet really a space, there were all these little sort of pods everywhere, but there was no sort of central landing place for Evolver or anything else. And as we kind of realized sort of simultaneously is, number one, we realized that one of the best ways to connect with people who are interested in consciousness is through their bodies, right? Because most of us, we don't necessarily unfortunately, most of us don't even think of it until like, oh, we get sick, or it's like, oh, that's when we start to go, okay, what can we do to heal ourselves, right? And that physical touch point is often the result of possibly some other psychic or some other emotional blocks that one has that ultimately, becomes a disease, right? But what is the most tangible way, instead of talking to people through sort of philosophy or through sort of intellectual means, is really a more effective way is through the body. So that's when we realized, and maybe the best way is to create sort of this botanical dispensary that would be a beautiful meeting place and a beautiful place for people to find these herbal remedies and botanical products, and also have it be a brick and mortar space where people could come and hang out and find each other, and also have it be live learning in presence rather than just online. And that's when the Alchemist Kitchen idea and the sort of brick and mortar came into being. So we were looking for spaces, and we found this beautiful space on East First Street, 21 East First Street. And that was our first location. Now it's on Crosby. So, and, at the time, was really fascinating because we were really debating whether or not we could even do this as a company because we're still, figuring out our business model. But what we took the plunge, and what we quickly realized is how hungry people were for a gathering place, right? For a place where they could express freely. And what was, I think for me, the most moving moment is when, this is right when we opened and one of some of our very first events, you would see people, coming in suits, right? Very conservative looking. And then you'd have people come in with all their tattoos. You'd have goths. You'd have, all kinds of, herbalists, like super, super granola. And like everybody would just come together in this beautiful way. It didn't matter, what you looked like, whatever your gender was, whatever your inclination was, whatever your age was, all kinds of people were there. And to me, that was a moment where I was like, oh my God, we really hit something here. We really kind of created something here that could really be successful because, not only are we providing, a location and a service in the community, we are actually activating it through all of these different classes and, full moon events, and also through our herbalists who are there to educate people on the products that we were selling, right? And we would also invite the herbalists to come in and talk about particular plants, like what is ashwagandha, what is blue lotus, and they would be able to not just talk about the plants, but also it's a way for them to sell their products, right? So we were gathering some of the amazing creators and makers, artisanal makers especially, who maybe didn't have a distribution network or were only selling, in farmers markets, and we could bring them into the store. And of course, I'm not saying we're the only store who did that, but this was just another place for them that they could come, meet their community, hold classes, workshops, as well as sell their products. So that was really how it all came together in the beginning.
Wow, that's fascinating, and it's cool to hear the threads as well. Pinchbeck, who's I would say relatively controversial figure in some psychedelic circles. He wrote the first major piece in Rolling Stone that put Burning Man on the map. Later, soon after that, wrote Breaking Open the Head, which was a New York Times bestseller, and it felt like him and Ken really amplified that notoriety or that popularity into this as you said, this sort of mycelial network of places and locations where local juntos or symposiums or just meetups would take place. And several years ago, meetup.com was published, and so now there's a lot of just local psychedelic societies. But it feels like the initial push in that way did come from the Evolver network and sort of the current modern internet age. And so you're here at this really pioneering company. You've come out of a finance background and gone and dove really deep into the topic of consciousness and plant medicines. I'm just curious, what was that experience with Kanna like that was so impactful? Because when I think of Kanna, it's like, for me, it's a nice mood booster. Mm-hmm. It gets me into a slightly more sort of heart open space. It's not, and I have moderate levels of sensitivity. I'm not a neurotic hardhead, but I'm also not super, super open necessarily. And so I find it to be pleasurable. But when compared to LSD for me is like, it's the sort of psychoactive shift and the altering of our consciousness it can be night and day. This, of course, depends how much you do. A microdose won't do so much. 250 micrograms certainly will. So bring us into that Kanna experience. Was it the ceremony? Was it the amount of medicine? What was the context in which that was happening? And why was that so impactful for you at that point in time?
Yeah, it happened, back in 2013. It was in New York, actually. It was not, anywhere exotic necessarily. It was in a loft in Tribeca with a shaman. And I had not really had any besides like smoking some weed. I don't even think I had done any mushrooms at that point. So it was like that, and that was it, right? And I didn't know I just was enthusiastic because I've just always been a very open-minded person. So I show up and, there was a little lecture, but it was very much based on trust because the shaman was giving different people different substances. And later, it was only later on that I found out it was Kanna, but it was what made it so, and there definitely was music, but it was not live. And, we're in groups. We were not told to like, oh, just stay by yourself. So it was very sort of free flowing. But I had a high dose of Kanna for sure. So it was the dosage had a lot to do with it. And I think, it's set and setting. And I just was super open. And I have to say that I really had never felt so heart open, so connected, and so much in acceptance and feeling that sense of belonging. I'd never felt that in my life. And also just feeling love, so much love for everything and everyone around me. And, that's what made it super, super indelible. But I think beyond that was just the sheer ability to connect with another person. Not at all, even remotely, my mind was just like not going to like, oh, I wonder what they do for a living. Oh, what? No, none of those usual questions that you would ask when you meet someone, right? And so that was really cool. And no, there were no hallucinations because obviously Kanna is not psychedelic. It's psychoactive, but not psychedelic. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience. So answering your question, Paul, about, okay, you're going to have a mind-blowing experience with ayahuasca or like LSD or something, I think that totally has its place because sometimes we just need our egos just blown right open, right? We just literally need someone to like slap us on the face, right? And like shake us up in order to shake us out of our sort of dual reality, right? Dual consciousness, right?
Yeah.
To go into this
our default mode, right? Yeah,
right.
It's like.
But here's the thing that I only really learned through working with Kanna for many years, is that the way Kanna helps us and supports us and teaches is very, very different. So you have those plants like you just mentioned, like whether it's ayahuasca or even psilocybin or LSD, that just gives you a mind-blowing experience, right? But then you're like, after that experience, you're like, oh, whoa, you're just like, oh, I need some time to integrate this. Or some people keep going and chasing that experience. What Kanna does is it actually is a medicine and it is a sacred plant medicine that teaches you almost from a yin standpoint. So you have, when I say yin versus yang, I mean mind-blowing, meaning like hit you over the head. That's very yang. That's like boom, right? And then you have Kanna, which is quietly sort of working with you and you think, hey, nothing's going on. Oh, I don't really feel much, right? But actually, it is working even more powerfully, I believe, through your subconscious because it's under that radar, right? Because you're not trying to like defend against it because whatever this vision that ayahuasca is showing you is too painful. You don't want to look at it, like whatever it is, and you're able to be on it, right? While every day you can still go into work, you can still you're still sober enough. I'm talking about on a regular dose, right? So let's say, for example, our chews at 30 milligrams, I consider that a normal dose. That's not a microdose. That's actually a dose, right? So you're able to take a dose and still like function really well. In fact, your cognitive executive ability is even improved. Your mood is lifted. You have less stress. You're calmer. You're more present, right? So you can operate this way. So it actually integrates into your life a lot easier. Right. You can literally take it every day because it's adaptogenic. That means it's not toxic, right, to your system or nor to your liver. And it helps build resilience to stress over time. So that subtlety is actually super powerful. And this is super important to say, especially in a Western audience, Western context, because so much of what the culture of the West is about is very out. It's very yang, right? It's very like, okay, bigger, faster, boom, right? We want more of that pow. And, Kanna works very differently. Kanna works kind of more yin, right? So it kind of is, it's there, it's supporting you, right? And if you take it continuously, you realize too, a little bit after, like, wait a minute, how come I'm not so triggered anymore, right? I'm not triggered so easily when I'm around my family. Or, wow, I'm a lot more patient with people. How did that happen? And that's because, Kanna has this ability, like I said, it's adaptogenic. It has this ability to kind of reset your brain and help bring it back to factory settings in a way. That's kind of the metaphor I like to use. And so you're not in the vicissitude of a lot of your ups and downs so much. And you will only see this, if you take it kind of continuously over time, which it's kind of designed to do. And what's even more interesting is when I was in South Africa and Namibia, I spent 3 weeks there recently, specifically to find the indigenous Khoi and Bushmen, to speak to the elders and the medicine people directly and say, look, we read all this stuff on the internet and everything, but we would love to hear from you. If we have your permission to talk to you, how would you talk about Kanna? How do you use Kanna, right? And, sadly, very few, if you talk to a lot of the Bushmen and Khoi right now, a lot of this medicine knowledge has been lost. They don't really remember Kanna so much. But you go, I went deep into the bush, especially in Namibia, and I found, these medicine men who, and a few also in South Africa that still use it. And the conclusion I had with, after talking to all of them is that Kanna is very well suited to take as an everyday sacrament. Instead of, yes, you can take a higher dose. No worries. You can do that. And I had also a Kanna ceremony while I was in South Africa. But, what it always ends up calling most medicine people to do is to actually take it regularly because of all of these beautiful effects that I just, shared, which means, meaning that it has a way of kind of breaking you out of the matrix in a gentler way and also sustaining you through that process. So, for example, after you do a massive ayahuasca ceremony, you're like, oh my God, I just shown so much. I need time to integrate, right? Kanna is great for integration after any psychedelic journey because, it has this ability to help you process emotions. It holds space literally because it opens the heart, and it's from a shamanic standpoint, it is heart medicine. So it brings you into consciousness through the heart, and it holds that space for you to process all that stuff in a very loving way and gentle way. And that's honestly, that sort of virtual hug or plant hug is kind of what we need, especially in this day and age when we are always, walloped, whether by stressful events or even when we're doing psychedelic ceremony, right? And Kanna is also great, in my opinion, for before someone goes into full-on psychedelic ceremony as a gateway plant, because it starts to connect you into that sense of oneness, that feeling of connection. So that you kind of have a sense of what that field is like before you go in and do psilocybin journey or something like that. So it's really interesting from a psychedelic standpoint, because even though it's psychedelic adjacent, it's psychoactive, but not psychedelic, it still has a beautiful kind of relationship with other psychedelic plants, not necessarily together at the same time, but in the ecosystem of what it means to work with plant medicines. And this is, again, a beautiful way of teaching how we can come into a more empowered relationship with ourselves through relationship with these plants.
I had a couple thoughts there. One was, how does something like Kanna compare to SSRIs, or even more broadly, how do adaptogenic herbs or adaptogenic plants compare to SSRIs? So when we look, because SSRI is something we take consistently, Kanna, it sounds like, can be something we take consistently. Typically with supplements like that, even adaptogenic herbs, I'll do a 5 days on, 2 days off rhythm, because having some level of reset helps with the bioavailability and the efficacy and things like that. But just bring us a little bit into, Kannas versus SSRIs. How do they interact differently? What should people on SSRIs be mindful of if working with Kanna? I'd love to hear more nuance and context there.
Sure. So Kanna is a natural serotonin reuptake inhibitor and a serotonin releasing agent. So it's a serotonin releasing agent through the activation of a protein called VMAT2, which transports neurotransmitters out of cells. So it acts on serotonin in two kind of elegant ways. It inhibits the reabsorption of serotonin in the body, and it also actually helps to release more. besides that, the most studied, excuse me, let me back up for a second. What's also interesting about Kanna is it has 35 known alkaloids, which is a huge amount compared to, many other substances, of which we really only know, or of which only 3 have been more deeply studied. That's mesembrine, mesembrinol, and mesembrinone. So there's a lot more that's going on that we're still discovering. So that's one aspect. And so how do I compare it to SSRI, Kanna to SSRIs? So Kanna does work in similar ways, like, to SSRIs, but again, it has all these other alkaloids. It's organic, obviously, versus SSRIs that are chemical. There are definitely many negative side effects to working with SSRIs, especially longer term. And I just want to preface this by saying I'm not a biochemist and I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. So I can only go so deep into SSRIs themselves, and how they work. But, you often hear of tolerance buildup with SSRIs. You often hear of even addiction to SSRIs. It's difficult to get off them once you're on them. And, it actually can be very dangerous if you you have to really titrate off slowly. So, and, there are negative side effects that often people want to avoid with taking prescription SSRIs. So you don't have the issue with Kanna. Kanna also is adaptogenic, which certainly SSRIs are not. And SSRIs also, how do I say this? Often mask and numb or deal with very much just the symptoms. And often they're risky and can cause even more anxiety or more, it could actually have sometimes the opposite effect. So, you have here a plant that's Kanna that is adaptogenic, that's not toxic to your system, that does not have tolerance buildup as long as you're not having heroic doses like all the time. And, it's a great alternative. I'm not saying, of course, sometimes I'm a big believer in allopathic medicine has its place, and so does herbal medicine, and so does plant medicine. And I think understanding this landscape, it's never like one size fits all, and it's never like one thing all the time. So, I think that having Kanna as an alternative to SSRIs is really important because when I talk to a lot of psychiatrists and therapists, they've always been complaining about, okay, what can I prescribe someone, who is depressed or has anxiety, like either benzodiazepines like a Xanax or, SSRI like a Prozac, right? And then of course all the brands, right? But there isn't really that much of an alternative. Now, slowly there is, obviously with legalization of, of some psychedelics, but still that's a very, controversial in still many quarters. And so suddenly you have a plant that's Kanna, that's legal, that's safe, and has a good safety profile compared to a lot of these other substances. So it just offers up another option, which in itself is something wonderful.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And what's coming up for me is I think of SSRIs. We've talked quite a bit on this show about microdoses of psychedelics, in particular LSD and psilocybin, which tend to have a little bit more of a oomph behind them, whereas Kanna seems to be potentially a great bridge. As you mentioned, it's already legal. It does have neurogenerative and neuroprotective benefits. It's adaptogenic. It's plant medicine with all these incredible alkaloids. And, it's currently legally available in so many ways and forms. And which brings me to my next question about education, because then the gap to close, especially for prescribing physicians or nurses or therapists or whomever, the biggest gap to close then is education. And, when I look at Empathogenics as a brand, I think what first stood out to me, and this is obviously a clear personal bias, is the branding, the design, the colors, the aesthetic, because I'm a huge nerd when it comes to branding, design, how things are portrayed, what they look like. I think beauty is the closest thing to truth. And we should always aspire to create products and services that have a beauty to them. And so I'd love to, for you to bring us a little bit deeper into why did you design Ka as a brand the way that you did? And what impact do you hope to have on broader education and understanding of Kanna through Ka as a brand?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Paul, because not many people ask me that. It was very intentional to create Ka with its bright colors and sort of very friendly, accessible way, because even way back when I had my very first Kanna ceremony, I was thinking, wow, I need to bring this out of the ceremony space, right? I need to bring this to in a way that's fun, that's accessible, but still in integrity, right? And having that sort of science backing and making sure that, all the ingredients are sourced the right way. And so when we first were conceiving of the design, I worked with an amazing team of designers and branding company. And, we wanted to bring something that was, we're like, all right, what does Kanna evoke? And so we were like, this idea of like being heart open, but what does that actually mean? It's like, oh, wow, it means feeling alive, feeling human again, right? And it's like, whoa. So we want the bright colors for sure to represent that. But then we didn't want to go to like the hippie spectrum of the 60s either, right? We didn't want to go full on retro. So we're like, how do we make this, today, right? And still use the bright colors to represent what it would feel like when you take Ka, right? Which is like having less stress, feeling more feeling bright, or literally feeling more mood lifted, and seeing more possibilities in life in general. So that's how we created it, and we very, very intentionally made it so that it is not scary or too woo-woo looking, or too sort of like from like olden times, right? Where it's like, oh, so magical that I don't know what this is, even though it is super magical. So that's how we came up with that design. And we definitely prioritize education. So whether it's sort of through our posts that we do, so on social, or whether it's like our blog, which is we're about to launch actually, which has a lot of articles. We've done a lot of work assembling some of the best research out there to share with people, because it is very important for people to understand, especially because, ironically, of the psychedelic revolution, which is great, right? Everybody knows about knows about psychedelics at this point, even if they haven't tried it themselves. But because of that, there's also maybe a little bit of like, oh yeah, everything that comes out that I don't know about, I've never heard of, is a psychedelic. No, that's not true, right? Or like, there's so many things that start with a K or sound like a K, like Kanna, cannabis, kava, kratom. What? And then it gets quickly confusing to people. So it's important, obviously, because again, with psychedelics too, I think there's often a great tendency to try and stack things. So it's like, ooh, I want to stack my LSD with mushrooms, or ooh, what can I do with this? And because of that, it's even more important to know about what you're doing, because it's like, hey, we want people to have the freedom to do what they want. But then if you're going to have that freedom, please have the responsibility to know what you're putting into your body, because it could be very dangerous, right? So yeah, so we do our best to get those messages out. And we created a little guidebook too, our Ultimate Kanna guidebook, which is you can download on our site. So yeah, we're going to continue to do as much of that as we can.
Fantastic. Education is so key and central, especially for a legal substance like this that's currently available, that's adaptogenic, that's accessible to many. And what's so interesting about Ka, so the first time I tried it was at the MAPS conference in June 2023, and then soon after at Wonderland in Miami, and it feels like pop rocks in the mouth,
Yes.
which was a
Feel the
pleasant
tingle.
surprise on my part because I like the tactile, the
Mhm.
feel. I'm a huge fan. Some people I was with were like, this was unexpected. This is like, this hasn't happened before. And I've always been curious as to why. So I figured this is the perfect
Right?
opportunity to ask you, why is it that Kaz chews are like fun pop rocks in my mouth? What's going on there? And how does that help with bioavailability, or how does that help with the
Yeah.
efficacy of the medicine?
So happy you're asking that question. So the tingle in your mouth, the party in your mouth is from this beautiful plant that's synergistic with Kanna, and it's called Agmella or Spilanthes, also known as Spilanthes. And it's this beautiful plant that originates from the Amazon, but now grows in many places. And it is very antimicrobial and very antifungal. It's actually very, very good for you. And it's a plant that's used to treat malaria and HIV, believe it or not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So as it's doing all the popping in your mouth, right? What it's actually doing is it's a bit of an analgesic as well, right? It used to be called the toothache plant. So before Novocaine or dentists, people would chew this if they had a toothache as well. So there's a lot of history there. What it's doing in your mouth is as it's doing its antimicrobial sort of scrubber bubble magic, it's stimulating your salivary glands. So you may have noticed that you actually suddenly salivate more. And what that's doing is it's preparing your mouth to absorb the beautiful goodness, sublingually through your mucosal membrane in your mouth, which is more direct than through your gastrointestinal system. So the chews were designed in a way to have you go yum yum yum, chew it, and then have it kind of get absorbed through your mouth. And that tingle, besides the, what it's doing from a health perspective, is also a little sign. It's a little like, hey, come back into the present, right? It's kind of making you notice so that you are also, it's a signaling mechanism also for you to know that something's happening. So there's all of the psychological as well as the sort of the health reasons for that, formulation design.
Well, and that was also a question that was coming up for me about what's this relationship between ceremonial use. So in your initial experience that you spoke about in 2013, which from the sound of it was with Armand's group, that initial experience is very ceremonial. There was a specific intention. There was a community element. And that allows for, as you talked about, a certain spaciousness and openness. Whereas, when I'm at a conference with 12,000 people and I take the little tincture, or maybe I get a couple gummies and I'm still on my way, there's obviously a lot more going on. Mm-hmm. And yet what I'm hearing in your explanation of this is that the tingly, while having physiological effects, I think one of the key ones being a faster absorption rate, because swish it around in your mouth and that saliva helps to get into the capillaries of the cheeks, which is a much quicker absorption rate than through the stomach. But also it's almost like it's like it's a moment of presence. It's
Exactly.
An opportunity to have a little bit of a ceremony. I have these little breath mints that are made by doTERRA that are pure peppermint essential oil. And when you put it in your mouth, you notice it's not light or faint. And I feel similar with the Ka. And that's one of the things that I really loved and appreciated about the gummy or the tincture is I've tried a lot of other Kanna products and none of them have that intentionality built in. So, super job well done overall on product formulation and product development. And what I'm curious to know, as we're nearing the last maybe 5-10 minutes of our conversation, is vision. We talked a little bit about the mission, but vision for Ka. How do you want to continue to grow and develop this as a brand, as a company, as a supplier of Kanna? And I'm also curious just to hear your thoughts on when you look a year, 3 years, 5 years from now, how might Kanna be rolled out to more and more people? And just as an example of this, you have what I would consider to be a CPG, consumer packaged good. It's consumer facing. You're trying to reach a lot of people with it. There's also research going on with Kanna. I believe it's without the alkaloids. It would be synthetic Kanna for things like erectile dysfunction, if I'm not mistaken, through an FDA approval model. So similar to psychedelics, we're seeing multiple routes and methods. The core difference being Kanna is currently legal and available, whereas most psychedelics are not. So vision, mission for Ka as a company, but also how you see this rolling out in the next 3, 5, 10 years to a broader consumer populace.
Yeah. So, you spoke of our mission, which is to restore full spectrum aliveness for all beings. And, the second half of that is really um, to have more heart-centeredness in people, and to bring more heart-centeredness into the world, because that's a big part of what Kanna teaches. And even though we don't often say that out, sort of have that as something up front, that's a huge part of why we do what we do and why I created this company. We're so good in our heads and our intellect, right? In our minds. We are often, though, unfortunately, cut off from our hearts, or this head heart connection is not so great. And given where we're at in the world right now, I think this is a hugely important thing, for a hugely important aspect that we need to recover for ourselves. And this is not something outside of us. This is something that, an innate ability that we already have, that we haven't exercised enough of, right? And having a balanced head heart is really important, just for our own health and well-being, but also just to how to be in life. And I think it's not a coincidence that suddenly, out of nowhere, you see all of these Kanna companies coming up, or there's just more talk of this plant. And it's still the very, very beginnings, to be honest, because still a lot of people don't know what Kanna is. And, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening now. I think it's happening now because we're in a huge transition, from our old paradigm world to a new one. And it's very rocky, and you can see it. You can see it manifested out, right, in so many ways. So plants, we human beings evolved with plants. We have a symbiotic relationship with nature. And I think that this plant is showing up a lot more now as our ally. And, it would behoove us to actually take notice and, try it out, or, start working with it, start collaborating with it. And most people don't even think of, oh, I need to, what do you mean? Don't I just eat it? Like, what do you mean come into a relationship with plant? And I know that's hard for most people, maybe not for people who listen on this channel, but it's really important, because it's actually saying, hey, instead of being so transactional as we do, as we're so used to doing in the world, here's an opportunity, right, to actually pay attention and build a relationship with this plant, with yourself, first of all, to notice how it works with you. And then you'll start noticing where the interconnections are that are around you, through having more empathy, because that's also what Kanna does, like with other people. And then starting to notice, wait a minute, hey, we can really see how we are interconnected, not just in journey space, right, while we're high, or in like this psychedelic space, but in our daily lives as well. So it's part of integrating that back into our daily lives, and having our journey space be our lives, right? And what would that look like? So that's like a big sort of, the bigger 50,000 foot view and vision for the company. And we want to bring it to as many people as we can, and to educate people, and to actually bring them into real experience. Part of that vision is building community, because at the end of the day, so fundamental to Kanna and to Empathogenics is this idea of connection. And, so whether it's building our, ambassador network, or just doing events, and this is, I mean, we're still very young. We're like less than 2 years old. So we're still in the very beginning stages of this, but that is a big part of our vision. It's like, how can we come together? And it doesn't even have to do with Ka at that point. It just has to do with coming together as human beings in a heart-centered way, I think with Kanna as a plant, where it sits in the landscape at the moment, you already mentioned it's legal, which is really helpful. And I think that between how cannabis sort of paved the way for legalization of other substances such as psychedelics, and now ketamine, and then soon MDMA, psilocybin, like all of that is going, which is great. Um, I think though that there's a huge opportunity for Kanna to be, I think the closest analogy maybe is CBD, and how CBD suddenly like went from nobody knew what it was to like, oh my God, it's everywhere and everybody knows what CBD is. I think that Kanna is similar in the sense I think it will be that popular because it just is a great plant. And is a great complement even to cannabis because it takes away the paranoia and also potentiates cannabis and takes away the munchies, which is also really cool. So it's just, we're always, and after Kanna, there's going to be many other plants, right? But I think that having like the psychedelic space somehow mapped out gives room for the psychoactive space to kind of come into being more. Not, just to be clear, psychedelics are also psychoactive, but we're talking about the non-hallucinogenic psychoactive space, right? So that's like, Kanna, certainly, sassafras. It's just thinking, I guess kava would
Probably
be there as well.
kava, kratom
Right.
potentially, although
Kratom,
kratom has more addiction
all of that.
potential than.
Exactly. So there's that realm. But I see Kanna, I think, gaining more and more popularity because it's easy in the sense that it's subtle, so it's not as jarring for people to try or to use. And for all the reasons I said before, like being an adaptogen, being legal, being not toxic, being a great alternative for uh, chemical SSRIs, as an example, or even something like Adderall, right? Because of its focus improving ability. And there's so much research, Paul. I mean, think about it. There's like all this research on Kanna and addiction that's been happening, right? And there already is research that shows, especially with methamphetamines, how it's super helpful there. And with, I think there was a study on morphine and heroin addiction and Kanna. This is all actually going to be in our blog, but that's one aspect. There's so much, and this is all anecdotal still, right? There's not actual full on research yet, but even its implications for Alzheimer's because of its ability to lower inflammation and help with chronic disease and even Parkinson's. So there's that aspect as well. And I think this is only the very beginning, and we're going to see a lot more come out of the medical field, for medicinal use of Kanna for all these different kinds of diseases, especially inflammatory diseases, because it's such a powerful anti-inflammatory as well.
Fascinating. Well, Stephanie Wang, Ka Empathogenics, stephaniewang.com, and then Ka Empathogenics, that's empath, genics, kaempathogenics.com. Stephanie, any other invitations or offers or perspectives you want to let the audience know about before we close?
For sure. Come visit us on our website. Easy way is to say ohmyka.com, ohmyka.com. Follow us on Instagram at ka.empathogenics. And also, we have a special code for you. Use Third Wave and get 10% off. So yeah, and we're going to be starting our next Kanna microdosing journey into the 30-day Kanna microdosing journey into the heart on June 30th. So we would love to invite you to come and join us then. And all that is if you go to our site and purchase the journey bundle, which has like a lovely little journal as well as some stickers and like basically months worth of Kanna tincture and chews, then you are actually entered for free into this 30-day journey that is a facilitated journey that has an opening ceremony, a closing ceremony, and tons of activations in between, like somatic exercises, yoga, meditation, and sound. And you'll also get a private WhatsApp. You'll be part of a private WhatsApp group, which has direct access to myself and our chief scientist and to the community. So it's a great place to ask questions and share experiences.
Thank you, Stephanie. So ohmycod.com, Third Wave gets you 10% off. Check out the Journey Bundle. They have their next cohort for the 30-day microdosing journey with Kanna on June 30th. It was such a pleasure to have you on, Stephanie. I appreciate all of the richness and depth you've brought to our conversation, and I look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you so much, Paul, for having me on Third Wave.
Hey listeners, Paul here. I hope you enjoyed our episode today with Stephanie Wang. Remember to check the link in the show notes where you can go deeper into this episode with a full transcript and all of the links that we mentioned in this conversation. And as a reminder, if you want to try Ka for yourself, just head to ohmyka.com and use the code ThirdWave at checkout for 10% off. And join us on our community forum at community.thethirdwave.co. We have a lot cooking there, and we'd love to see you on our private community platform. That's community.thethirdwave.co. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on the intentional and responsible use of psychedelic medicine.